This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Buying a car shouldn't eat up your week. That's why Carvana made it convenient. Car buying that fits around your life, not the other way around. You can get pre-qualified for an auto loan in just a couple of minutes and browse thousands of quality car options, all within your terms, all online, all on your schedule. Turn car buying into a few clicks and not a full week's endeavor. Finance and buy your car at your convenience on Carvana. Financing subject to credit approval. Additional terms and conditions may apply.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the lovingly prepared stock from Thursday's roast chicken.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny.
What's up, Kenny? What have you been doing?
Aside from changing my chair, which was squeaking like a fiend,
Not
I
the
had to move
squeaky
furniture for
chairs.
this. I don't think the listeners understand quite what a domestic horror story getting ready for a podcast is. There's a clock being taken off the wall and moved outside the recording zone. It's ticking loudly in the corridor. I hope you can't hear it. And I've dispatched my other half, Bex, because she was sneezing at the other end of the house and still peaking my little meters here. So it's been a very difficult morning for me, Alex. What about you?
Yeah, I'm trying to recover from Glyndebourne yesterday. I went, thanks to a very, very generous friend, actually a big fan of the podcast. So I'll say hello, David, and hello, Caroline, because I know they listen every Sunday.
Hello, David and Caroline, and thank you for looking after Alex yesterday.
They took me to see Handel's Soul, and neither Handel nor Oratorio is particularly my bag, but the production absolutely blew me away. The direction is just splendid. It's like a series of nightmare tableaus. And it's so timely, Kenny, because it's all about just the violence in that area that's been going on for thousands of years. And it was just incredible, an incredible experience. I'm ever so thankful.
Glyndebourne's always an amazing experience. I have to ask, did you take a hamper? And if so, what was in the hamper?
Oh, I cooked for
Of course you did.
the hamper, as did David, actually. We shared duties. Some people have to sing for their supper. I sup for my singing.
That's going on a T-shirt.
Where's Naomi?
Naomi's gone off to Ireland to drink Beamish, I believe, down in Cork or in that
Yeah,
neck of the
because
woods.
apparently she's got no signal as well. That sounds like bliss, doesn't it? She's up
Yeah,
a
that
mountain
was-
somewhere.
That old is good. I'm just going into an Irish tunnel. No signal whatsoever.
She'll be back on Thursday. And also let's wish everyone who celebrates, and all should celebrate, a very happy Pride.
I hope the weather is kind to everybody out there.
Yeah, the last couple of years are a reminder that equality is a garden that needs constant tending because the weeds never stop growing. So well done, everyone, for participating at an event. Before we begin, let me remind listeners that we put all our content out for free to everyone and rely on the generosity of those who can afford it to support us. So dig deep into your pocket and touch your card to our thingy. You can do so from as little as $5 at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod.
And because we don't offer content for that small fee, our perk is to make you part of the Quiet Riot team. We've got quarterly editorial meetings through which you get to shape this podcast, and there's an invitation to our Discord channel where you can chat to us and to each other. And regular Ask Us Anything events, during which you can, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, really, isn't it? The next one, 2 weeks on Sunday the 20th. So please make sure you're all signed up in plenty of time if you want to join us and the Quiet Riot crew.
Now, Kenny, what shall we talk about today? The wonder that is Nick Clegg, how first past the post is the right electoral system for the UK.
Oh, it's all the burning topics.
Shall we fashion just a nightmare episode for Naomi?
Insert screams here.
No, I think it's essential to cover talk of a new party that is trying to take shape to the left of Labour. It's a big development, isn't it?
On the global scene, we should probably examine the latest hopeful rumours of a Gaza ceasefire.
In homage to Naomi, actually, let's look at a new pan-European poll on young people's attitude to politics.
That is plenty to keep us out of trouble. Let's get cracking.
Quiet Riot.
Actually, Kenny, before we go on to the topics we decided on, there's a little bit of breaking news. Reform UK, who had 5 MPs elected, then went down to 4, then went back up to 5 after that by-election, they're back down to 4.
What?
There's a statement from Lee Anderson, who is the party's chief whip, that says, I have today received a call from James McMurdoch, who has advised me that he has removed the party whip from himself. Where was it?
I'm amazed. There was me thinking it was just his head that was jammed up there.
Where was the whip? Pending the outcome of an investigation into allegations that are likely to be published by a national newspaper. Not to make a liar of Mr. Anderson, the Times has actually rushed publication of the story. And
they have.
It's up now. Reform MP James McMurdoch suspended after Sunday Times investigation is the title. And the short version of it is that there are allegations that he borrowed tens of thousands of pounds under the government's bounce back loans during the COVID pandemic.
Oh.
After reactivating a couple of companies that appeared to be dormant and did not file accounts, which is apparently against the rules. And additionally, he has not declared his directorship of those companies under parliamentary rules. And I'm reading from the Sunday Times here. Approached for comment, Mr. McMurdoch warned Mr. It's a good thing that we don't really need to comment a lot of this story. Approached for comment, Mr. McMurdoch warned, be very, very careful.
It's a very big whip, and this might smart a
And
little.
said, I quote, a technical expert would be needed for anybody to understand the matters.
On the Sunday Times journalist who wrote this must have had the absolute ball.
So, actually, whose is the byline? It is Gabriel Pogrund. So,
A tip for that.
I mean,
he's removed the party whip from himself, though.
so there you have it. That's the bit of breaking news. And as I say, it really doesn't need commenting on at this stage, does it? It's enough to just share in our earnest, instant reaction.
I'm going to lie down in the dark cupboard now.
So now, let's get cracking.
Quiet riot.
And now, the news you've all been waiting for. The arrival of yet another new political party on the UK electoral scene.
You're joking. Not another one? Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this. There's too much politics going on at the moment. Why does she need to do it?
Fronted, perhaps, by that box-fresh political manjanoo, Jeremy Corbyn. News of the project was confirmed on Thursday when Coventry South MP Zara Sultana said she was quitting Labour and would co-lead the founding of a new party with Corbyn. Now, Sultana had the whip suspended last year for voting against the government over the two-child limit on benefits, if you recall. She's being joined by a handful of independent MPs, hinting at forming a new kind of political party offering hope, socialism and peace over managed decline. Political wonks and mainstream media alike are holding back applause, presumably until Corbyn et al. Have got some more of the basics agreed.
Jeremy, one of the things that there's been a lot of talk about is whether you will turn your alliance of MPs into a formal party and whether you're thinking of contesting the next election as a formal party. Where are you on that?
The alliance group of MPs, five of us, have worked very hard and very well together over the past year in Parliament, and we're coming up to our first anniversary.
But there's some data that shows that if you did launch a party, you might do rather well.
Well, exactly. So next time you ask questions, ask about the alternative of a left independent party, of a socialist view that's being put.
So are you going to create one?
Let me finish. You're so excited. You just want it to start, don't you?
We haven't got long. The reason I'm pushing is we haven't got long to the end of the podcast.
That's what it is. There's a lot of people all around the country in different independent groups. You look in Birmingham, look in Liverpool, look in Southport and so on. There is a thirst for an alternative view to be put. I'm working with all of those people. That grouping will come together. There will be an alternative view and there will be an alternative put there, which is about a society that deals with poverty, inequality, and a foreign policy that's based on peace rather than
And
war.
would you like to lead that group?
I'm here to work. I'm here to serve the people in the way I've always tried to do.
Now, there is some confusion about whether Corbyn himself is actually part of the setup. Do we know anything at all, Alex?
So it was announced on Thursday by Zara Sultana, and she said she would be co-leading the party with Jeremy Corbyn. And there were quite a lot of reports that Jeremy Corbyn was a little bit ticked off that she had jumped the gun and announced this before, I guess, conversations between the two of them were completely settled. So he didn't say anything for about 24 hours. Then on Friday, he confirmed that there were talks about shaping a new party. The conversation slightly changed from the two of them co-leading this new party to the two of them co-leading the discussion to create this new party, if that makes sense.
So it was more like Corbyn's group chat being made public rather than a formal announcement.
For me, the most notable thing has been that people who are traditional Corbyn allies have already declared themselves out of that project. John McDonnell, who's of course his shadow chancellor, Diane Abbott, Clive Lewis, they've all explicitly said they have no plans to leave the Labour Party. Actually, stronger than that, they said they're not leaving the Labour Party to join this outfit. What do you think of that?
The fact that the announcement was kind of coughed and spluttered out rather than being planned and media managed in any way, it speaks to an organisation that somebody as long in the tooth as John McDonnell probably want to back away from anyway. It's not the professional way to do it. I think Thursday when it was announced, that was the Spectator Party, wasn't it? I'm assuming that drink was involved at the Spectator Party, and I'm just wondering how much of what we're hearing actually leaked out at that event. It seems too much of a coincidence.
If I were to bet some money, I would say that the aim had been to do this on the 1-year anniversary of Starmer in power.
Yeah.
Discussions were not as advanced as the Corbyn side of things would have liked. And Sultana decided that the symbolism of that date was too big an opportunity to miss, so put out her statement anyway. If I were to just scry what might have happened behind the scenes, that would be my guess.
It's not a huge group of people at this stage, is it? It's a handful of independent MPs. You know, it's a group of people that we might describe as principled. It's kind of like an indie band whose last hit was back in 2019, isn't it? They're still there banging about, but only for the core fans, perhaps.
There's 5 of them, and with Sultana joining, that makes 6 of them, which is more than Reform or the Greens.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's be respectful of that coalition of independents, as it were. I think it is significant.
The obvious question is, does this mean simply more choice, or is it something that's going to split the vote on the left? What are your thoughts on that?
You know that I have long thought, coming from a continental tradition, that the lack of a left-wing party in the UK is a really peculiar feature of this political landscape, right? Because everywhere else, there is something to the left of the centre-left party. And I don't mean a party like the Greens, which certainly sits to the left of the Labour Party politically in terms of many, many policies, but their focus is environmentalism. I'm talking about a traditional socialist alternative like Die Linke in Germany or Mélenchon's party in France. You know, in most European countries, there is something to the left of the centre-left party. And I don't think it is a coincidence that British politics has moved so much to the right in the last 4 decades. Things that would be considered completely run-of-the-mill centre-left 30 years ago are now seen as loony communist policies. And things that would have been considered very hard right 30 years ago are now seen as quite mainstream.
Yeah, the Overton window has shifted a long way.
I think the lack of any pull and any threat from the left side of politics has been damaging to the general picture. And even though this does present dangers and risks to Labour, I do think it is a good thing to have more choice so that people can vote for something that expresses their politics more closely. Because what we're seeing at the moment is a little bit that some disaffected Labour voters, they're going over to Reform because they see it as sort of a non-establishment party. And so I don't think a new party like that would just suck Labour votes. Actually, More in Common did a little bit of polling and found that a new party, in theory, created along those lines would probably start around 9-10%. 3% of that would come from Labour, and some of it would come from the Greens. Actually, the Greens would be the bigger losers. And some of it would come from Lib Dems and some of it would come from Reform.
It's a very mobile electorate at the moment, isn't it? It's something we saw in Scotland in particular. And actually, I think a hat tip to politics north of the border in this one, because, of course, up there, the left-wing choice is far more beefy. You know, the SNP sits to the left of Labour and the Greens in Scotland sit very much to the left. But at the recent by-election, there was a lot of swap between parties of the left moving towards Reform. SNP voters who had stopped, parked their car with Labour and then got back into it and drove on to Reform because of what was called the Scunner factor, and the fact that people were not particularly looking for a party with necessarily a left or a right-leaning bias. They were more just looking for a party that wasn't part of the status quo, wasn't part of the establishment.
Kick a few chairs over.
Exactly that. And that's something that this Corbyn project could bring to the party. Why not just join the Greens in that case?
Because of what I was saying before, I think they want to anchor the party explicitly around social justice rather than environmentalism. Zach Pulaski, who we've had on the show a couple of times, has said that he will wait to see how this shapes up. He's not against some kind of strategic alliance. And my sense is that that's what we're looking at now, actually. What we're looking at because of this fracturing of politics that we've experienced. Even with first past the post, I think we've got a few years of coalitions ahead of us.
Right.
And I think people need to start adjusting their psychological stance to that idea. It just seems like the two traditional parties of power cannot keep making that same blackmail, if you want. It's either us or them. A lot of constituencies are showing that other parties can come through and win. And I think that feeling will only amplify and spread. And people will begin to think in terms of, well, actually, maybe a Labour-Lib Dem coalition would be the best outcome of this election. Or maybe a Labour-Green coalition would be the best outcome of this election. I don't know.
Quiet Riot.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
Quiet Riot.
You're a very political animal, even by the standards of this podcast. Let me sort of ask where your instincts are on this issue. Is what Reform UK are doing at the moment, and I know you have views on it, but is it proof that a new party can actually make real progress in a first past the post environment? Or is Team Farage simply the exception that proves the rule?
It's interesting because Reform are not actually breaking through. They're just largely grabbing the share of a dying Conservative Party. So it's less a new party coming through than an old party experiencing a sort of mutation. But that's not to say that the same could not happen on the left. Because again, I mean, it's impossible not to sense a fatigue with the Labour Party. People really have given this Labour government a very, very short leash. They seem to lose patience with them after a couple of months. It's like, we want change right now. We want everything to get better right now. And if it doesn't happen, we're just going to keep shopping. I don't agree with that, as you know. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's fair to the Labour government, but that is the sentiment one picks up. I don't think it is a sensible approach because we've seen what's happening across the Atlantic when you take that attitude. But it is what it is.
And I suppose, as Democrats, we should applaud any bid to expand the size of the pool in which voters are able to swim, shouldn't we? Democratic involvement is a good thing. And as we're going to talk about a little bit later in this show, democracy itself is under a little bit of pressure at the moment across the European continent. So I think it's fair to give a small, measured round of applause to independent MPs simply for doing something that adds some contrast, a little bit more contrast to the political landscape.
Yeah, and opens up some options, because at the moment there's no one articulating a socialist alternative to economic policies. Everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet, and that is corrosive to a political system. It narrows the discussion, it makes it stale. And Labour people should be very, very careful not to scoff and sneer and appear dismissive. I don't think that is the right strategy. I really don't. Even if you are a dyed-in-the-wool Labourite, I think you should acknowledge that there are people who feel politically homeless on the left. You mustn't treat voters as if they somehow belong to you.
That's
and
right.
Anyone else coming onto the landscape is taking your voters. Voters don't belong to anyone. You have to gain their trust and their votes. And it's actually taking voters for granted that is in large part responsible for how stale and toxic our politics has become. So I very much welcome the development. Like I said, I think it's a healthy one. I don't think they've got off to an auspicious start. And this is not just about the launch. Jeremy Corbyn should be a figurehead, should be someone that gives his blessing to the party. But co-leading, no. He's already had a really good go twice.
Yeah, I agree completely.
And I accept that there were many factors. I accept that he faced a very hostile media. All of that is true. But the point is, all those things are still in place. This would be a less advantageous position. If you can't do it within the auspices of leading the Labour Party, you're unlikely to do it as an insurgent. And I also think it's time to pass the baton to the next generation, especially when you're trying to create a fresh left-wing alternative. So
I agree completely. And the ability to sort of use his wisdom and his huge political experience behind the scenes would, I think, give him more authority and more power than having to be in the spotlight every single day.
Which he's not good at. Interestingly, and we will come to discuss the pan-European poll and what young people think of politics. The other thing Maureen Common found was that if this party came to be, it would instantly be the most popular choice among 18 to 24-year-olds.
Right.
And so, again, I would say to Labour people, take a breath, count to 10, and consider whether there are advantages to having something else out there for people to express themselves within a political system rather than being disengaged and disaffected, or even worse, seduced by the far right.
Yeah. They've got so much to decide. I mean, we have to confirm whether it's going to be a party, whether it remains as a sort of a loose movement, or indeed if Corbyn takes a front seat, it becomes a prolonged group therapy session, doesn't it? That's one of the huge challenges that they've faced and they've got to avoid. One of the other areas that Labour, of course, has got issues is on its own backbench, as we've seen that in recent weeks. Is there a danger, do you think, that unless their polling starts to go up, that we might see quite a lot of MPs who look very likely to lose their seats actually just defecting to register protest and make some noise while they still have time?
Yeah, I think that's a real danger for Labour, because usually the thing that keeps people in line is the idea that they have a better chance of retaining their seats under the auspices of a very well-organized, well-funded, well-run party machine, right? If polling continues to pan out the way it is at the moment, or even get worse, then there's a lot of people who know they will not win their seat again. That adds a really unstable variable, I think, into the mix for Labour. Large majority as they have, having a ready-made thing that one can join to the left of Labour creates a potential situation. If we see a large-scale rebellion against a particular piece of legislation like we did with the welfare bill, it really begins to change the calculation as to how that ends up.
Quiet riot.
Rated T for teen.
Each year, thousands of adults lose their shred. It's an epidemic simply known as shred loss. But it doesn't have to be this way. Because rekindling your shred is as easy as playing the new Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4. With new parks, cross-platform multiplayer, and sick new game modes, we can put an end to shred loss everywhere. Get the new Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 and show the world that the shred's not dead. Pre-order Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 and play the Foundry demo.
On Monday, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrives in Washington for his third White House visit in less than 6 months. Yes, Trump has been in power less than 6 months.
Say it's not true.
It is true. I thought it had been 6 months, and then I actually calculated it's not. 20th of July will be 6 months. I know, right?
Holy smoke.
There is fevered expectation that a ceasefire in Gaza will be announced during this visit on Monday, with Hamas said to have reacted positively to a ceasefire deal that Israel has already accepted.
They said they gave me a positive response? Yes. Well, that's good. I mean, I've heard that, but they haven't briefed me on it yet. I think they're going to be positive about it. We have to get it over with. There could be a Gaza deal next week. Yeah. How optimistic? I'm very optimistic, but, look, it changes from day to day.
Now, caveats on this. This is mostly according to Donald Trump. And half the time he doesn't know what he's saying. And the other half of the time he's saying stuff to put pressure on one or the other party to do what he wants them to do.
Yeah.
And second, if a new ceasefire does come into effect, it will be the third during the war. The first lasted 10 days. The second was collapsed by Netanyahu when he reneged on a promise to move to a second scheduled phase that would have made it more permanent. So all these caveats aside, are there reasons to be more hopeful this time? What do you reckon is different this time round,
Well,
Kenny?
that's the thing. I mean, with all things in Gaza and Israel, Netanyahu is the question, isn't it? Strongman politics is never going away there. And we know that Netanyahu has maintained a very aggressive stance because it gives him electoral advantage. That's the game he's always played. He's very good at it. He's been criticized by the great and the good from the Israeli political world as well. What I was struggling was what is actually different this time around? What is it? It comes on the back of what happened with Iran. There have been various developments in terms of Middle East geopolitics. What's happening behind the scenes, we're not privy to. A much bigger game is in play, I suspect. And I think that would be the thing that would make things different this time around. I'm not hugely optimistic because I've followed politics in this area for decades. But at the same time, you're always looking for that little flag that waves and goes, look, this time it could be different because there are bigger, even bigger issues at stake here. And it's still Hamas on the other side of the table, which
is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, some might say that in some part could signal the failure of Israel's main strategic aim, to wipe them from the face of the planet. Do you think that's a fair observation?
I think that's entirely fair. I actually was quite taken aback that Hamas have indicated that they're ready to take the deal that Israel has already accepted, because it was really striking to hear the name Hamas as the other side of the negotiation. Not Palestinian leadership, not, some alliance put together that the West can stomach, but Hamas. And if the strategic aim was to wipe them out, then that clearly has failed. Now, what is different? Hamas's position is entirely different. They have been defanged to a large extent by various friendly proxies in the area being significantly weakened, and by the mothership that was Iran.
Yes.
They have their own problems, right now. So proxy wars will not be the top of their list. And so if you remove Iran and Hezbollah, and Syria is looking to be entering a more settled period, and the Houthis are less interested and look as if their deal with the US is holding. All of that makes Hamas a very isolated concern, doesn't it? So it's different from their side. Now, from Israel's side, Netanyahu needed a victory to move on from this, because it's the only thing that might give him a chance going forward. And it became painfully clear that he wasn't going to get the total victory that he was after in Gaza. However many people he slaughtered, it just wasn't going to happen. When that became clear, I think the fact that he's had a sort of success with Iran gives him a window to claim that as the big victory of the campaign and move on. And I have the feeling that he's also ready to move on because, like I said, he ain't going to get what he wants in terms of Gaza.
No. 2 points on what you've just said. First of all, there is a perfectly valid case to be made that Hamas, from a tactical perspective, from Netanyahu's side, actually it's okay to have them still as a bogeyman. If you take Hamas out of the equation, he doesn't have that bogeyman to focus on. So kind of point one, it's not a complete disaster from his perspective that Hamas is still here and playing a role of some sort. On Iran, I mean, Iran now have been humiliated. Does that humiliation give enough political cover to Netanyahu to be able to grab his chance now? Or in terms of going to a vote, or is it still expected that he would lose if he went to the people?
There's some interesting polling out. So he's had a bump since the Iran deal. His number of seats have gone up in comparison to his main rivals, although they still have the bigger block of votes, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so he would certainly not get a majority. It would certainly still have to be some sort of coalition. But he's in a better position than he was at the last election, and in a significantly better position than he was after the sort of October 7 events, which were seen very much as a huge security failure for the Israeli government. And so that seems to have slightly been forgotten at the moment by the electorate, and his public approval is also improving. So, at the height of his unfavorability, as it were, he was 58 unfavorable, 41% favorable, which is a minus rating of 17 points. And at the moment, those numbers are 53 and 45, so minus 8, a much more surmountable obstacle. And he's still favored as prime minister above Naftali Bennett, who would be the potential leader of the other bloc. Now, this is obviously before we enter any kind of election campaign process. But, Netanyahu is not an inexperienced election campaigner.
Oh, he's a survivor.
He's the cockroach of the world politics. And you can't see him not doing well during an election campaign. He knows how to fight elections. So this is interesting, although I have to point out that looking into the crosstabs a little bit, Likud's strengthening, that's Netanyahu's party, primarily reflects changes within his own coalition bloc.
Right.
So he's taken seats from the more hardline Itamar Ben-Gvir. So he's strengthening within his own coalition, but his coalition is not getting any stronger, if that makes sense.
Quiet Riot.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins, My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
A really lovely idea, and it was great. I'm glad we did it. So, right, do you want to vote?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, why do you hate young people so much? You're making us go to the army. You're making us.
No, you'll have a choice. You'll have a choice.
I've volunteered all my life, and
then you will love it. You will love it.
Why do I have to do it again when I'm finally coming out of education? And then
because I think a culture of service. I wouldn't do it like that. A culture of service is a good thing for our country, and you'll have a choice.
You're all waffling.
Let's talk about the kids then. Europe's kids, because the TUI Foundation and YouGov have just dropped a survey on what young people in 6 EU countries think about democracy. And, to be honest, it's not the glowing Yelp review democracy was hoping for. The headlines: only about half of young Europeans aged 16 to 26 think democracy is the best form of government. That's not great. It's not a crisis yet. But if democracy were a relationship, this is the part where someone says, we need to talk. Now, support varies pretty wildly. The Germans are more chill about this sort of stuff. Greeks are a bit more sceptical. But everywhere you look, young people are squinting at parliaments and wondering why they feel so, well, optional, I suppose you could say. And they don't just feel disillusioned. They feel invisible. Only 17% of respondents in this survey said that they felt represented by their national or EU governments. 17. That's basically the percentage of people who enjoy airline food. And I should mention that the TUI Foundation is the same TUI that runs travel trips up the Mediterranean. The TUI Foundation runs projects for young people throughout Europe. So it does a good thing. The rest of the kids, well, they're watching politics happen from a distance. They're waving. And it seems that they realise that nobody is waving back at them. Now, this is predominantly a European survey. The UK did run some fairly depressing youth surveys last year. And surprise, surprise, they're not feeling great either in this country. YouGov again did a democracy study at the tail end of last year, and only 1 in 5 young UK adults felt then that they had any say whatsoever in how the country is run. That's not political alienation, that's a political witness protection scheme. So, across Europe and the UK, young people still love the idea of democracy, but they definitely aren't buying the version that's currently in stock. Alex, across Europe, the picture is vaguely consistent. 57% across the continent prefer democracy to any other form of government, but it does vary. You know, only 48% in Poland, only about 52% in Spain and France, and Germany is by far the highest at 71%.
What are the other options? Like, what else is doing? What's the second most preferred form of government after? I'm a little bit baffled.
Well, I mean, the word autocracy crops up in the report, and I suppose the background noise to politics globally for the last few years has been autocracy. It's certainly the background. That's what we're seeing on the other side of the Atlantic. We've seen the rise of right-wing autocratic parties throughout Europe, and that, I think, is reflected in how young people describe themselves in terms of their political colour. There's almost a fifth of them, 19%, describe themselves as being politically right of centre. Now, is that significant? Well, the last time they were surveyed, in 2021, it was only 14%. Big, we always talk about the importance of looking for trends in surveys. So there is a big rightwards drift in terms of how European young people view their own politics. A third of them describe themselves as centrists. Another third are leftist, and 16% have no designation. I think the overwhelming message I got from this was, authoritarianism and autocracy isn't as terrifying to this generation as it perhaps is to older generations. And you couple that with apathy and the scunner factor that people are fed up with the status quo. And you find yourself in a perfect storm where, as we've seen, the rightwards drift of support is something that is happening everywhere. One of the questions that it's fair to ask, I suppose, is whether or not this generation is actually turning its back on politics. And I think it's quite important to highlight one of the findings from this work, that 3/4 of young Europeans see voting as a civic duty. It's a good thing that you should do. And 2/3 of them, more than 2/3, see elections as being an effective means of political change, which is up on the last survey. But, and this is a huge but, at the same time, only 17% of them feel represented by either the EU Parliament or their national parliaments. And this is the big warning light flashing from my perspective. There appears to be a critical representation gap. And it's a sort of gap that, as the years pass, if attitudes don't change, could start to threaten the legitimacy of the EU among those who we would see as being its future.
Yeah. A lot depends, I guess, on the wording of surveys like that, because I don't know if you remember, we saw a survey of Gen Z here being grossly over-reported.
Yes, I remember that.
You know, I think it was back in February, over-reported as a majority of young people prefer the idea of a dictatorship.
That's right.
But when you dug into it, you found that actually they preferred the idea of a strong leader. And when you probed further whether they think that strong leader should have no parliamentary or electoral constraints, actually that figure reduced and reduced and reduced until it was 6% that genuinely do long for a dictator. Although 6% is still quite a...
Yeah, that's a start,
figure. Yeah. But arguably, you know, psychologically, there's the percentage is higher in any surveys that you do divorced from politics, as it were, or rather divorced from the specificity of politics of your country in terms of would you quite like decisions being taken away from you? There is always like 1/4 of the population that expresses a preference for not bothering with this stuff. That politics is for other people. I just want to get on with what I'm doing, and I just want you to make the trains run on time. Yeah, it's a complicated picture. I would be curious as to whether that is a feature of their generation or whether we're seeing similar trends in different age groups. Because what I would like to know is this something that effectively you grow out of? Or is this something that we're seeing across all demographics?
Makes a huge difference. And I think, you know, we always have to remember that these surveys are released and are put together to generate headlines as much as to generate any sort of additional information. You know, but both requirements are there for all the surveys. Otherwise, the surveyors, they go out of business. From my background in journalism, I know oftentimes actually, the most important question is the question that you don't ask because you know that it kills the story stone dead. And if your instincts are spot on, and this is something that's not just affecting Gen Z, yes, it's a less sexy headline. The figures, if we take them at face value with all the caveats, they do paint a fairly depressing picture of how little trust there is in both national parliaments and the EU itself. I mean, typically in this survey, it's less than 1/3. Now, I think to echo what you've said, I dare say there's plenty of our listeners who are slightly longer in the tooth who might also have more than a smidgen of distrust in Parliament. But I think the difference between our generations and the Gen Z is that we're the ones who've allowed things to get to this uncomfortable point. You know, we do bear responsibility for those figures, whether we like it or not.
Yes, and also I think it's about paradigms. You know, people look at what's around they shop from what's on the shelf.
Yes.
And so, when you're in a situation where, the European structures, which are based on rule of law, democracy, those principles that emerged post-Second World War as ones that need to be made sacrosanct, and to an extent taken to supranational level in order to have a sort of extra layer of protection there. If you look at Europe, it is seen as indecisive and slow, and because democratic processes are slow. They are slower than someone just saying, I want to do X, so just do it. And when you're being squeezed from all around by a Trump figure, a Putin figure, a Xi Jinping figure, then you do begin to think maybe we need our own European version of that. Maybe that's the only way for our coalition of nations to stand up for itself in the world. It does become an attractive process. And so I'm not doubting the figures. I'm just posing a few questions because I know how surveys work. But the figures instinctively feel they don't feel counterintuitive. Let's just say that.
No,
right?
they don't.
They feel like they are onto something. The central political question, which I've thought for a long time actually, is one that's strangely not being asked or answered. I see a lot of attempts to create a situation where young people today can go towards having something like what the generation before them enjoyed, because that is seen as the big disparity, right? So if you're young, then your prospects of buying a house and starting a family or having a very steady job for life are much more remote than they were for your mum and dad. It feels like that's the wrong question because the world is a very different place.
Exactly.
So maybe the question should be, what do we offer to young people today that makes for a good life? If we can improve, for instance, renters' rights and the price of rental property, well, that provides the same sort of support and security that owning property does. Is owning property like a big thing for young people? I don't know the answer to that, but I know it's a question we're not asking because we're still looking at it from our age group's point of view. We're asking, what would I want? Therefore, that must be what they would want.
Yeah.
But it's just not like that. It doesn't work like that. Their concerns are different, and the solutions they're looking for are different. So maybe we should start asking the younger generation, what they feel about the taxation model, whether they feel public services provide what should be provided, or whether there should be more, whether they should be less, what taxation should be attached to that, what home living model they're looking for, how big a concern is climate change to them, and what sort of sacrifices in terms of tax they're willing to make in order to properly address that. And questions like that, we need to start, I guess, listening to the questions they're asking rather than imposing our questions on them.
It's never a bad idea. I think there's also an even bigger issue in play here. What sort of political leadership do they think would deliver any of this sort of stuff? Now, we've grown up and spent the last 30 years very used to technocratic, vanilla politics to a greater or lesser extent in the EU. Of course, anybody growing up in Gen Z has seen the rise of China, the rise and then resurgence of Trump, Putin playing everything by his own rules, the rise of, or the return of strong arm and strong man politics, while Europe itself has always been the polite, reasoned voice at the table. And that could be problematic. I'm just looking to see if there are any figures in the survey that reflect that. And actually, yes, only 42% of those asked said that the EU was one of the top three global players. America, 83% of people said that's one of the big three, followed by China on 75% and Russia on 57%.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying to you.
Yeah.
And they look at those three big players and all they see is an autocrat at the head of them.
And that's something that would make sense from my perspective to be generationally different. It's what they've grown up with.
Yeah. I find it odd that we are so hot on representation and diversity in terms of gender, in terms of including people of different ethnic backgrounds, in terms of including people with a disability, including LGBTQ plus people in our democratic setup. But there's kind of no provision for young people being represented. I would like to see a party make a positive effort to actually address that, to say, in the next election, we aim for 10% of our candidates to be under 25, let's say. Because, again, when the incidents are isolated, then what we tend to see, and I think Mary Black is a great example of this, someone who had a voice that made an impact and could have made a difference in our politics. And she dropped out because she found the environment too harsh, unaccommodating.
Yes.
It wasn't basically an environment that embraced someone of her age and makeup. My sense is that Parliament would be vastly improved for 30 or 40 more Mary Blacks instead of losing the one we had.
Equally, I think there's the risk that Parliament would do what Parliament does, and it would turn on young people who have not had a chance to become battle-hardened.
Which it did, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, even, to be honest, even the expression baby of the house, I think is just massively patronizing and
so condescending.
Annoying.
So it's not exactly a ringing endorsement for the future, but I suppose given the last decade, we should perhaps be a little bit relieved that the figures aren't even worse.
Quiet Riot.
And that's it for another Sunday School, folks. We hope you enjoyed it, and also that the rest of your day is going to go just swimmingly.
And thank you from me too, and don't forget to tune in for our main episode on Thursday, when Naomi and I will be joined by author, journalist and Quiet Riot regular Peter Gagan.
As ever, a shout out to those of you who back us on Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Thanks for helping keep this show on the road.
Enjoy your week and remember how much we love you all for giving us your time and headspace.
Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simone Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
No, it's not. It's ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Thanks for helping us keep this show on the road, even if my tongue is stuck somewhere.
Do you want to do that?
I'll just do it again. And
in a way that you don't sound surprised at everything.
I'm surprised by everything at this time of the weekend.
This is your before and after story. Prepare for an incredible career in nursing. At Southeastern College, experience expert hands-on training. Learn real-world skills in our professional lab and simulated settings. And train for opportunities as a practical nurse, registered nurse, or career advancement with our RN to BSN program. At Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.